May we start?
Yes, very well.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to say that it's a privilege to have you here, Klaus, and to have the audience too, audience online and audience and presential audience too. I want to talk some words about Professor Klaus. Professor Klaus is Professor of Social Science Methodology at Jacobs University in Bremen, Germany. And he has been selected by the American Psychological Association for 2022 awards for distinguished contributions to the international advancement of psychology. Professor Klaus has been president of International Association of Cross-Cultural Psychology from 2008 to 2020, but he has occupied several positions in this association. He is one of the most, or probably the most important researchers in the world on social cohesion. In business discipline, we consider the contributions of several other disciplines like psychology. And I guess we can today learn too much about social cohesion and make reflections about that and about organization too. Professor Klaus, you are very, very, very welcome to the SemeAd Congress. Please be comfortable.
Okay, I could hear you very well, Malu, and the words were honoring me, I think, a bit too much, but I'll try to live up to them. Just briefly, let me check whether you can now see my cover page of my presentation in full.
Yes.
Okay, good. So my presentation is Social Cohesion, Weal or Woe of Contemporary Society. Well, weal or woe are, of course, not contemporary English words, but they are nicely literary style. So is social cohesion something very good or something bad for contemporary society? That stands behind what I will be trying to convey. And I have been doing, as Malu has said, I've been doing research on social cohesion in several contexts. I will, here you see an overview of what you will hear. I will say something about the research aims of studies of social cohesion. I will then present to you a concept and measurement of social cohesion. That's at the core of what we've been doing. We have been developing a way to measure social cohesion of social entities of very different sizes or characteristics. I will then briefly introduce you to results from a secondary data analysis study with 34 OECD countries, a similar study on the 16 German federal states and German Bundesländer. But then I will show you that the concept we have developed can also be transported to several other, or has already been transported to several other areas of the world. We have done a large secondary data analysis study with 22 South and Southeast Asian countries. There has been a separate study in Kyrgyzstan. The study PI was Dr. Mandy Larson from my team, and I will tell you about that. But also, data have also been collected on using our concept in Mexico, and of course in my hometown of Bremen, and In Germany, again, then as you will also hear later, as a primary data analysis. So we have collected our own data. But let me progress. What is the relevance of social cohesion research? Well, nowadays there is something that is not fully clear whether that is a myth or whether that is reality. It is in public discourse right now when suggests that social cohesion currently is in jeopardy in many societies. So people polarize, people fight with each other. This is more a public discourse narrative, and often there aren't any data that really support this. At least they're not available and they're not done. This does not say that the public myth isn't true. It can very well be true, but one should really collect empirical evidence on to what degree it is true. And one really should ask and should not avoid the question whether there really are benefits of social cohesion, which you will find out later, I do believe, but it is totally legitimate to ask the question, is cohesion actually something we want? I'd say that on the side, I once was at a presentation of this of these studies in India, and my host said, well, social cohesion should be put into the dustbin of history because it keeps those who are the have-nots at the bottom and the haves at the top of societal life. Let's keep that in mind. But what I think, why is cohesion important? Because it mediates the relationship between social structure and culture and quality of life. So social structure doesn't immediately affect quality of life, but there is this concept of cohesion that mediates the relationship. What that exactly means will become clear in my presentation, at least I hope. So we started originally with what some people call a meta study. So we first studied what are the definitions of social cohesion, are there different dimensions, what are possible indicators if you want to measure social cohesion. Okay, so talking about social cohesion is of course much older than, say, after the end of the Cold War. So what is social cohesion? It describes a characteristic of a social entity as to the level of solidarity and social order in this social entity. The topic of political discourse, it is a topic of political discourse, at least since the French Revolution. Many of you will remember that one of the mottos was fraternité, and that is actually at the core of social cohesion as well. There was a re-increasing interest in academic discourse since the late 1980s, early 1990s. But there also was interest in the 1920s, a big study run by the famous psychoanalytic social psychologist, Erich Fromm. And we may ask, why has social cohesion become a topic of renewed interest around the time of when the Iron Curtain fell? Well, let's keep this question also in the back of our minds. Okay. What are the central international actors in the research field? It's not the case that my research group is by any means the only research group that is doing studies on social cohesion. Well, the book we have brought out is probably interesting and is comprehensive. Volume, but others in Canada, the Council of Europe, the World Bank, the OECD, several governments and individuals have really focused on social cohesion in recent years. Those of you who like bibliometric information see that here these are the most cited studies in social cohesion. cohesion. So where do we find it? We find it in urban studies. We find it in British Medical Journal, Social Science and Medicine, Political Studies, Annual Review of Sociology. So it is a truly interdisciplinary topic. I said myself that I am originally coming from psychology, but social cohesion clearly is a very broad interdisciplinary social science topic. And again, even social science is understood broadly. Okay, so what is a definition of social cohesion? The Council of Europe came up with one that says social cohesion is the ability of a society to ensure the welfare of all its members, minimizing disparities and avoiding polarization. So as you see, it points to topics that are quite current, namely, for example, polarization. A bit more academic and a bit more, I would say, well, fit for academic discourse is the second one that comes from the Chans and their co-worker. Social cohesion is a state of affairs concerning both the vertical and horizontal interactions of societies characterized by a set of attitudes and norms that includes trust, sense of belonging, and the willingness to participate and help, as well as their behavioral manifestation. So this is our point of departure. We have frequently, or 2 or 3 times, met with the Chans, and they were kind of the godfathers of the concept you will learn about in a second. There is, of course, there are 3 dimensions, or could call domains, of societal cohesiveness. There's a relational aspect, that is observed relationships between members within a collectivity. There are shared norms, values, identities as the affective side of social cohesion. And then there's a distributional aspect. How is the distribution of resources and chances in life? I will resonate a bit more about these, but then coming to our own concept. So it has to do with social capital, social inclusion, avoidance of social exclusion, with participation, cooperation. But you should remember, it is a property or characteristic, not of an individual. So social capital would be a characteristic of an individual. Social cohesion is a property of a social entity, a neighborhood, municipality, whatever. Okay, so then there's this ideational aspect that is often pushed forward. Are there shared values? Do people, stick to the same norms, etc.? And there's the distributional aspect. How equitable is the access to rights, to information? There's a big debate in the social cohesion, in the collegial discussions about social cohesion, whether actually distribution is a component, equal distribution is a component of social cohesion, or actually a predictor of it. So can social cohesion only exist in societies that distribute their resources equally, or is equal distribution already a point of measurement, which one can discuss? So again, what is social cohesion? The academic consensus is it is multidimensional. It's not a dipstick measure where you assess one thing and then you have it. It is gradual, that is, there can be low and high social cohesion. It is a characteristic of social entities, not of individuals, but it manifests itself in attitudes and behaviors of people. Just a brief rhetoric pause. Please try to understand these 5 points, because now I will progress to what exactly we mean when we measure social cohesion. So the quality of interactions among members of a community defined in geopolitical terms. So the people who live in a specific state of, let's say, northern Brazil. How do they interact? And good or high social cohesion is, in our view, characterized by resilient social relationships, by a positive emotional connectedness to the community, and by a pronounced focus on the common good. Wealth itself, inequality itself, characteristics of living conditions are, in our view, not part of the measurement, but they are the predictors. They are very important for having high social cohesion, but they're not part of social cohesion itself. The same with ethnic diversity and value homogeneity. Now here you see our concept in a rather nice graph. What you see is there are three domains to cohesion. One is related to social relations. The second is related to connectedness with the social entity where you reside. And third, there's the focus on the common good. Each of these three domains are differentiated into three dimensions that can separately be measured. You find a describing sentence here. Of course, I will make my slides available to anybody who wants to have them. This is a public speech, so you are entitled certainly to the slides that I'm offering. Now I've come to our studies, and you have to note that we have two types of studies. One study is we work with data that is already there in data archives and databases. And we started with the time phase from 1989 to 1994. The second was 1996 to 2003, 2004 to 2008, 2009 to 2012. Well, we didn't stop there, but we changed modalities. But at the moment, I have a doctoral thesis under supervision that continues this until in two more phases until 2020. That's not ready yet, so I cannot report. There was an international comparison that we conducted, and what was it about? I said exclusively secondary data. The representative cross-national comparative surveys, for example, from the Gallup World Poll, from the World Values Survey, the European Social Survey, the European Quality of Life Survey. There are many, many of these data sets. They're often overlooked, and we should turn to them very much. But we also looked at publications of expert ratings regarding ethnic and religious tension and corruption, and statistical offices data, which is also empirical data, but condensed, for example, crime rates. I'm focusing now on the process. In secondary data analysis, you initially have a huge number of indicators. These you screen by face validity. Are they, in your personal opinion, measuring what you think they should be measuring? Then we aggregate this, for example, in this case, to the country level and to the time periods under scrutiny. So then comes a final selection of indicators. We do that via exploratory factor analysis in correspondence with the dimensions we worked on. And what is important, there is an interchangeability over time, because in these secondary data analysis, you cannot always have exactly the same items. These items change from time to time. So what we then do, we come up with a factor analysis, and we let the computer extract factor scores from this. And these factor scores are then the scores for the country, and or for whatever entity you look at, but in this study, it's countries. Now, what are the questions like? Much more plausible than what I set up to now. So for social networks, we, for example, found items that, do you have relatives or friends you can count on to help when you need help? Trust in people, most people can be trusted. Acceptance of diversity, gays and lesbians are free to live life as they wish. Identification, how proud are you to be, this example, French or Brazilian or German? What is your level of confidence in the police? Or do you agree to get ahead, you need to be corrupt? That's, of course, reversed. Did you donate money to a charity? And now it's not that we have asked the people, but this is all data. These are all data that are there, that you and I and others can use. Do you feel safe walking alone at night? Have you signed a petition? The numbers behind the dimension name always say how many items we have for the measurement. Okay, then we just average these scores. That's called, we form a formative index that is whatever we have extracted up to now is then just added up and averaged. We color code our countries. So the orange ones have very low social cohesion. The dark blue ones have very high social cohesion. And now I think maybe the next slide or the second next slide can see that myself. Come my first results. Here you go. Sorry, the labeling is in German, but you know these maps. And what you see there is social cohesion is highest in the 3 Scandinavian countries, in Australia and New Zealand. The Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, Ireland, there it's high. Medium in the yellowish parts, and then it goes low in the former Eastern European countries, the former Soviet bloc countries, but also in Italy and Portugal. And the lowest scores were found in Latvia and Lithuania and Romania, Bulgaria and Greece. This is a ranking for 2009 to 2012. I'll skip forward a little bit. Those of you who are at least slightly familiar with the geographics of Germany can easily detect what's the case. Here on the eastern or the right-hand side, we have the former East Germany, former German Democratic Republic. On the left-hand side or in the west, we have the West German, the former West German. Now in United Germany, there is not actually a united Germany. There are clear differences in the social cohesion between the different parts of the country. Okay, now turning to Asia. I guide you through a tour around the world. There are concepts in Asia called social harmony or harmonious society. There's hardly a consensus on a definition of what social cohesion is. And what we now want to try is not whether the items that were used in the OECD study, but the concept of these 9 dimensions with in 3 domains works in Asia. And well, you see a quotation from the previous chairperson of the Chinese Communist Party, Comrade Hu, democratic and ruled by law, fair and just, trustworthy, fraternal, full of vitality, stable and orderly, and maintains harmony between man and nature. Well, too good to be true, but Chairman Hu was after similar goals as is the social cohesion concept that we have developed, of course, not influenced by the Chinese Communist Party. Our social cohesion index in comparison to this includes identification, does not have the environmental aspect, omits family relation. So in Putnam's terms, we look for bridging social capital and not bonding social capital. But what we do is we check whether it is legitimate to work with an OECD-based concept in other parts of the world. So we're after trying to measure this for South and Southeast Asia. We try to find patterns of social cohesion. Of course, an intervention policy is the ultimate goal. And we're looking after future development of social cohesion as a concept. What was our method for Asia? Again, it was secondary data analysis. Of course, we invited a lot of, well, 8 or 10 Asian experts to a workshop to help us with face validity selections of items as indicators of social cohesion, which we would maybe not know because we're not Asians. And then we even did something that is called in the methodological literature cognitive pretesting, but cognitive pretesting after the survey items were already there. So some items had to be thrown out, others had to be brought in, and we had to make sure through fairly sophisticated statistical analyses that the concept would be the same, would have the same thrust or the same core. There for Asia, the survey data was, we were looking at 2006 to 2014 in the Gallup World Poll, 16 to 20 relevant countries. The World Values Survey had 10 to 11 relevant countries. The Asian Barometer had 3 waves, 13 relevant countries, etc. So based on country coverage, time coverage, and continuity, 2 waves, 2 phases, as we called them earlier, could be studied. As you see there, no data from North Korea, no data from the Brunei, and the Maldives also had no data to offer. Others had data from several data sources. Okay. We also included so-called process data. I don't like the term, but our funder opted for that. Where you can find certain other indices. You can find something like the Corruption Perception Index for certain countries, the Worldwide Governance Index, measures of democracy. That, of course, needed quite a lot of work to kind of scrape the internet and the published literature on what would be usable for our purposes. Then there came an analysis. I don't want to bore you with the details of our analyses. I've been a number cruncher since 1978, I think. So please forgive me if it's still a bit too much of what the numbers mean to me. I know that most people will not be fond of hearing details of this. But here is our result. And I'll just let you take a look. The color coding is the same. So the more bluish something is, the better. The more dark blue, the better the social cohesion. Whereas when it turns to dark yellow or whatever that could be, orange, the worse it is. So we had Hong Kong on top, Singapore. Then Japan had a dark blue in one of the waves. Also Vietnam, quite high. In the second wave, 2009 to 2012, Hong Kong on top, Singapore. Somewhat surprisingly, Thailand and Bhutan is, of course, that country that has its happiness in its constitution. Some of you may be surprised that Sri Lanka is up there. Secondary data are always, there are always pitfalls with secondary data in Sri Lanka. They only had Tamil participants of all surveys. So the civil war of Sri Lanka didn't have any repercussions. It was only the ruling ethnicity that was asked. So that's why they come out quite good. India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan are at the lower end. Relatively little to almost no social cohesion in these societies. That you see here again in the picture, the orange and yellowish are the ones that are not so good, the prosperous, let me call them city-states like Singapore or Hong Kong or Taiwan are quite at the top. Okay, now it becomes a bit more statistical. What you see here is that social cohesion, this is the overall index from 2009 to 2015 for these 22 Asian countries. You see that with increased GDP, this is the natural logarithm of GDP per capita, social cohesion increases. So for a country, it's good to be rich if social cohesion is one of its goals. More easily said than done. However, for net inequality, it's more curvilinear. The Gini coefficient is a coefficient that says how equal and how unequal income distribution is in the country. And the higher the Gini, the more unequal distributions are, whereas the lower Gini, the more equal distributions are. Or here, gender inequality. The higher the gender inequality, the lower the social cohesion. Nepal, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, hardly any gender equality. On the other hand, Singapore, Japan, and Korea, South Korea, the Republic of Korea. Quite high gender equality, so low gender inequality and high social cohesion. In summary, there are powerful predictors of social cohesion in Asia. So low perceived income deprivation, low gender inequality, high levels of political rights. I didn't present a statistical graph for that, and a low percentage of agricultural land. So this is important to note. Social cohesion is not something that we had in the good old times and now has gone. So if there's there are pre-industrial societies that still have a lot of agricultural land. They are less cohesive. But different from Europe, social cohesion does not predict health and current well-being in Asia, whereas in Europe it did. So cohesion does predict expected well-being. People who live in a cohesive country are more optimistic about their future well-being. High cohesion in a country is the basis for decreasing unemployment rates, and high cohesion gives governments the chance to invest higher proportions of tax income into public goals. So you see already sneaking in, yes, social cohesion is something that does not belong into the dustbin of history, but is something that does people good. Measured on the level of society, social cohesion does have an impact on individual behavior, but unlike in the OECD world, equitable economic development is yet a stronger predictor of subjective well-being than is social cohesion. What does that say? In countries that do not belong to the richest segment of the world, like the OECD countries, their social cohesion makes people optimistic, but furthering the economic development is yet a stronger predictor of subjective well-being than is social cohesion. In the OECD world, it is the other way around. Social cohesion is one of the strongest predictors of subjective well-being, above and beyond the assets, the wealth that is there. Sorry, I was in the wrong direction. Now, brief view into the Kyrgyzstan study. Well, the Kyrgyzstan study was kind of middle of the road between a secondary data analysis study and a primary data analysis study. The World Bank financed this project, and there were 6,356, as you can see, individuals who were interviewed, but this was then aggregated to village and sub-district levels. And here you find all the names of the that were part of the study in Kyrgyzstan. Hard to understand for us, the same color coding, and then we tried to have clusters of units of Kyrgyzstan. We used items that were only asked in that study, so you do not need identical items to use our concept of measuring social cohesion. The 5 clusters have different scores. Dimension 1.1 is the weakest for all. That is, do you have intact social relations? This obviously has to do with the fact that in Kyrgyzstan, there are not many functioning roads, for example. Cluster 4 shows score on, a high score on dimension 3.2. So 7 sets of relevant societal characteristics are important for social cohesion. First and foremost, the wealth and economic situation, but then access to education, objective inequality and poverty, also the spatial structure. For example, if you imagine Nepal, which has high mountains and deep valleys, it's more difficult. The degree of modernization, so is there internet or not? Internet is positive for social cohesion. Personality does play a role, and the Pearson product moment correlation, sorry, this is technical. It's of course not a study that allows us to infer causality. These are high correlations, speak for importance of these determinants. You see here, for example, I marked this in red, that there are two personality traits of the people studied in Kyrgyzstan that were in opposition to good social cohesion, namely extraversion and neuroticism. Interesting for psychologists. Again, higher employment in more cohesive subdistricts, higher levels of schooling in more cohesive subdistricts, more languages spoken in more cohesive subdistricts. So there's Russian, there's Kyrgyz, and there's Uzbek spoken there. So communication ease is important. Main access roads paved was important, and mobile phone services in more cohesive subdistricts. More cohesive subdistricts have higher health satisfaction. Now switch to Mexico. In the Mexican study, we had the chance to study well over 30,000 participants. You see in the leftmost column. How did I get these data? We have a graduate student of our doctoral school there, who is the daughter of the owner of a survey company. Then just another jump, Bremen, my hometown. Same color coding as before. There are very, very cohesive units, but there are also very, very non-cohesive units. And in some instances, they're quite close by to each other. Now, unfortunately, the funder called for new colors. You know this result. This now is primary data. We did surveys that allowed us to use our own items. And these own items were handpicked, so to speak, on the basis of preliminary tests for our study. And you see here, the more yellowish blue is East Germany. The social cohesion is worse there. The more bluish is speaking for high social cohesion, which is mostly in the southwest of Germany. Even smaller units offer us the picture that in the East, there's quite a bit of problem, or they have a lot of issues with social cohesion. There are some areas in the West that's also they prove themselves to be difficult. One even in a rich state of Baden-Württemberg, another in North Rhine-Westphalia. So you see, Germany is not unified across the board, but social cohesion can be measured, is measured, and it shows that there are clearly differences. But the most cohesive are there in the south in Bavaria, and that's where cohesion is best. What are the take-home messages? I'm approaching the end of my presentation. It is possible to utilize the same conceptual approach. Social cohesion can be assessed globally without having to use the same items. So this is something important for the future. If you want to assess social cohesion of social entities, you can use, and we say in methodological terms, you can use emic items, that is items that come from your life world. Try to check whether they fit our conceptual approach. If they do, they can be used in studies in your country, in, well, essentially any part of the world, without having been used in the OECD world. The concept is what is important. Social cohesion, second take-home message, social cohesion is closely related to prosperity. So, yeah, minimum wages and things like that are good and are important for societal cohesion. So if you increase prosperity into all groups of society, then it is easier to achieve social cohesion. On the other hand, social cohesion does have positive repercussions in people's lives, regardless of their being well-to-do or not. So social cohesion is not only the poor benefit from social cohesion, or only the rich benefit from social cohesion. That's why I'm also not of the opinion that it has to go in the dustbin of history. It is something good for everybody because it is connected to positive, reported, subjective well-being, future time optimism, and different positive indicators. The portrait approach to measuring social cohesion can be utilized on all levels of aggregation. We haven't done this, but we could also say have a huge sample from Africa, Latin America, North America, Europe, Asia, and then compare continents. This is, yeah, it's not that interesting. But you can also use it for municipalities. That was done in Mexico, for example, and even for neighborhoods, as we've done it in Bremen. So the same concept, not the same items. The 9-dimensional thing is the core, not the single items that are used here or there, or are not used here and not there. These are the most important points that I wanted to make. And thereby I say thank you for having me. And the website you see down there is one from Bertelsmann Foundation, whom we owe much of the funding that made these studies possible.
Thanks a lot, Klaus. Okay, we don't have questions here, but not yet. But I'd like to make some questions. May I?
Of course.
This social cohesion could be considered when cultural logic, like values, like social axioms, like meta-norms. What do you think about?
How this concept of social cohesion is related to other concepts, is very important, and often there is a misunderstanding. I think the main thing is that one has to remember that measuring social cohesion is not something that says something about characteristics of people. Of course, you can relate scores that your residential area has with regard to social cohesion. You can relate that to individual behavior, attitudes, etc., etc. So it is very much possible to relate scores of social cohesion that have been determined for social entities with individual characteristics. I showed that very briefly when I pointed at the Kyrgyzstan study there, and we have published about this. There we have looked at the relationship between prevalent big five characteristics of the people who live there and social cohesion in the whatever 30 or 60 sub-districts of Kyrgyzstan. Yes, you can do that with certainly also with social axioms where you say, I want to relate that to the degree of social cynicism or of reward for application. You can certainly also relate that, we've done that in Mexico and published about this, with value preferences. But the tricky issue for doing these kind of studies is that one always has to remember that social cohesion is not a characteristic of a person. Social characteristic is social cohesion is a characteristic of a social entity. So we're exactly doing interdisciplinary research from the very beginning. We're interested in what people think and do, but we are strongly interested in what a socially cohesive entity does to their behaviors and attitudes.
Okay. We have here one question from Bido. I don't know if you remember that Bido was trying.
Yeah, he wanted to come, but then COVID came. Yes.
Yeah. He is asking if did you study the social cohesion related to Human Development Index?
Yes and no. You saw probably one of my slides. I don't know whether I want to get back to that. It's probably too time consuming. In the Asian study, we of course did relate this to the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is a formative index that includes information about the GDP of a country, but also the education level of a country and the life expectancy of a country in a fairly complex formula, but that doesn't matter. So this says a country is developed when it is, let me be a bit too plain, when it is rich, when people are healthy so they can grow old, and when people have high levels of education. And they also kind of have a ranking there. It's always the case that between social cohesion and the Human Development Index, there is clearly a positive correlation, but that emerges only when you have sufficient variation in your HDI, so Human Development Index scores. If you use the Human Development Index for OECD countries, particularly for the European OECD countries, and relate it to the social cohesion scores, there will be very little of a relationship because there's not enough variation in the HDI scoring for OECD countries or for Western European countries in particular. They're all very similar. So Human Development Index does not show very much or doesn't explain very much variance in the social cohesion in the social cohesion measurement. But yes, if you were, for example, doing this in Africa, which is also done by not by me, but by several others, then of course distinguishing between South Africa and say Botswana on the one hand side, and then the poorest area in Sierra Leone and Southern Sudan, there will be strong relationships between HDI and social cohesion.
Okay. Klaus, thinking out the box, only what's your point of view about the impacts of social cohesion on doing business?
That's an interesting question. I must again raise the proviso first that I am not perfectly sure as to whether this can be transported, so to speak, from the OECD world to other parts of the world. In Germany and in the OECD world, we can say that the more social cohesion there is, the lower the level of unemployment, for example, because the societies care for those who are unemployed. They want to include them quickly. One of the most important predictors of social cohesion is, very technically speaking, is few insolvencies in a certain region are a good predictor of social cohesion. What's the chicken and the egg there is of course very unclear. It could be that in a socially cohesive society, people who do business do it with more ease than in societies where people do not do business so well. But it could also be the other way around, that active entrepreneurs positively influence social cohesion. That is always difficult in these studies that are working more or less on the social entity level. It is very difficult to come up with panel studies that allow us to really come to causal conclusions. What we sometimes have done, that's also in our book, what we have done is we used a cross-leg panel analysis, meaning we took social cohesion and well-being as two predictors of social cohesion and well-being 2 phases later, and then you can check whether social cohesion is more important for well-being or well-being is more important for later social cohesion. And there we can show, but this is very difficult and very playing with numbers, and I like your word out of the box. Social cohesion seems to be more important for well-being than well-being is for social cohesion. And for business, for successful business, I would also say social cohesion is an antecedent of good business and not the other way around. But this is my, well, let me say it, evidence-based feeling, not that I really know about this.
Yes, okay. We don't have other studies on Latin American?
Not comparative studies. There have been, I've had a colleague who worked with I never heard what came out of this, a colleague who worked with our concept in Chile. And I would, of course, love to export our concept to Latin America. And yeah, but our usual funder, the Bertelsmann Foundation, they want to be active mostly in Germany. And next week on Wednesday, I'm giving a similar talk to a group that works on Africa, but Latin America is a bit, out of the funding scope at the moment.
Okay, then we have a good opportunities here in Latin America to study social cohesion. Yes? I
hope so. Yes, I'm always, as you know, I'm certainly interested in consulting this and eventually even coming to Brazil if COVID allows. And yeah, the political situation has changed in Brazil, which will probably make it a bit easier. But I'm an outsider, so I shouldn't say too much about that.
Okay. Then we don't have. There is one other question from Dante Mantovani. How stable is the social cohesion index? That is, can a country change it for good in 1 or 2 years? Otherwise, could it quickly drop the index because of crisis events?
Wonderful, wonderful question. I had prepared originally when I sent you my first slides. I had also prepared a brief report about our newest study that had a series of surveys in one of the federal states of Germany, namely in Baden-Württemberg, which is the southwest. And these data can excellently respond to the question, because typically social cohesion of maybe not countries, but of subunits of countries are quite stable. So for a conflict-ridden area of a country will rather stay a conflict-ridden area for quite a number of years, et cetera, et cetera. And a prosperous area will stay a high social cohesion area. But what we discovered there for the first time, and we were really surprised ourselves too, was that in the state of Baden-Württemberg, from 2017 to 2019, we had, on a scale from 0 to 100, we had in 2017 the score of 63.0, and in 2019 of 63.8. So a nuisance, just, yeah, 0.8, not even a percentage point up. So then we came to Baden-Württemberg again on the turn of the years 2021, 22, which was a high incidence rate time with COVID. And the government of Baden-Württemberg funded this type of study through Bertelsmann Foundation, but they funded it more or less exclusively. And now you can guess what happened. And the thing we typically would expect is in 3 years in between, or 2 to 3 years in between, we would have 1 point, 2 points less or more. Now the scores in Baden-Württemberg went down to 54.0. So from 63.8 to 54.0, that's almost 10 points. We never had that before the COVID incident, before COVID times. So what the question implies, no, social cohesion does not very quickly change by any political measures, but it is indeed sensitive to really tough ongoings in the real world. So yes, in Germany, in the southwest, in the prosperous part of Germany, social cohesion did go down. People don't do that much with each other anymore. Their social relations have deteriorated. They do not participate in political processes that much anymore. They don't help each other that much anymore. So the warning lamps are really lighting up. So it does pay to do this as a constant measurement of social indicators. We originally thought, well, we do that every 5 to 10 years, that's enough. But now it showed in crisis times, the change was much greater than it had been, for example, during the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. There, very little happened, but COVID did or provoked a huge jump downward in the last years.
Okay, there is another question, but I think it's close to the answer that you have done.
Okay.
What impacts have disruptive large events, such COVID, you have told about that, and Ukraine war had in social cohesion? I think it's the same, probably, no?
Yeah, of course, as somebody who is who works as evidence-based information dispersion, I cannot say anything about the impact of the Ukraine war. I would expect that COVID effect was stronger, because COVID affected really everybody in Germany, whereas the Ukraine war, as terrible as it is that it's going on, does not really affect people's lives here. This shouldn't sound cynical, but it's nothing that affects people's daily lives very much, at least not noticeable. Of course, in the middle range, of course, the money that we're now spending, because, well, there's inflation, there's a lot more goes into the military, etc., etc. This is, of course, a point that will create difficulties in the end. But at the moment, I think the Ukraine war will rather not have a strong impact. But this is only my hunch. I don't have any data yet.
Okay. Well, you don't have more questions, and I want only to say thanks a lot for your.
Thanks to you. It was fun. It was fun to do, and across an ocean, and it worked quite well on my side, at least. The volume, the tone. It was. I've had much worse transmissions. So thank you to everyone, and I hope I could meet some of the expectations.
Yes.
Thank you.
You have the expectations. Thanks a lot. Thanks to the audience that is here. Darcy is here hearing you. And to the next opportunity that you have together. I think the next opportunity would be position in Brazil.
Okay. Face to face would be great. Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Malu. And Darcy, my regards. And yes, I will now. It's now almost dinner time. I'll have to cook dinner now. Okay. Thank you very much for having me, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.